All right, we're here for a special show of Truth Be Told. I'm Tony Sweet. We have Captain Ron here, and the one and only, one of our favorite people in the world, Professor James Fetzer, is with us today. And the crowd goes wild.
Wow.
How you doing, sir?
Shows, and I think you're both terrific, and you're doing a great job. It was a pleasure being out in California,
Oh, it's
able
great
to
to
come
see you.
into the studio with the two of you. Really terrific stuff.
Well, thank you so much, and you always bring it. You bring it with the game. I'll tell you, when we walk away from these shows, we learn something and at least scratch our head, going, okay, I'm thinking about this one. And today we're having another great show because this month was the anniversary of Marilyn Monroe, and she was an icon for a lot of people that are younger may not know who Marilyn Monroe was. Norma Jean. There's even a song about her, Elton John. But today we're going to talk about her death. Many think that it was a suicide, but most of us think there's something a little bit more to it. And you're here today to set the record straight. So let's go ahead and just get right into it.
Well, Marilyn actually was my favorite movie star, I think, of all. She's just a sensational person.
Right.
But evinced a kind of vulnerability, sexuality, charm, sophistication, seductive, fantastic, just a amazing person who was completely dedicated and ambitious to succeed in Hollywood. As she put it in rather colorful language, what she'd be willing to do to succeed, and she managed to make it to the top of Hollywood stardom.
Yeah, and I was a huge fan. She was gone way before I was even born, but there was something special about her. I don't think there's just a very few people since her that really made the impact.
She's
Hollywood.
iconic.
Yeah, she's and she was a pinup, but there was a lot more to her than just a pinup.
Well, you can't see it, but on my wall back here, I have five images of Norma Jean in a sequence. I mean, I'm that much of a fan. I think she was a really remarkable person with all her vulnerability.
Yeah,
that's an interesting photograph.
Yeah, no, and like I said, she was beautiful, but I think there was a lot of tortured soul there too, and I think that's what led her into what we're going to be talking about today. I really think so, and it all started right here. Marilyn Monroe found dead, sleeping pills, overdose, blame. So, what's your take on this? Because she ran, as you would say, with a lot of interesting people, from presidents to senators to, I think wasn't it even the mob, and was it Fidel Castro? I'm not for sure. I may be wrong in that. Kind of lead us down this road to where she went from the Hollywood star to this conspiracy backstory of her end up death.
Marilyn was very much the heart of Hollywood in her heyday. She had important relationships with Frank Sinatra.
Right.
And she knew James Dean, Marlon Brando, a host of others. I mean, and of course, she would have relationships with both Jack and Bobby Kennedy. In fact, I'm convinced that her relationship with Bobby was emotionally even more significant than her relationship with Jack.
Really?
Yeah. Well, Jack was quite the womanizer, and
right.
He was like his father in that respect. But as I'm going to explain, it's not that he was a great lover. It's just that women found him very attractive. They said of Clark Gable, he was so successful with women, not because he could secure any woman he wanted, but he knew which women wanted him. And, he thereby had many conquests, not quite on the order of Wilt Chamberlain, perhaps, who claimed to have over 20,000 conquests. That's quite a few notches on your belt.
Right.
I haven't figured out how many per day that would be, but it's keeping pretty busy, as they say.
That's hilarious. So I'm curious. So when was the first kind of meeting? And maybe I'm getting out of order here. How did Marilyn and John F. Kennedy meet? Do you know?
I do think it actually was at an event, a social event in Hollywood. It may may or may not have had to do with Bing Crosby. Jack, when he finally came out to California, Sinatra had been his great supporter. He had a helipad put in at his home in Palm Springs. But because at that point in time, Sinatra's associations with the mob were very much in the public mind, he decided it would be politically inexpedient and instead stayed with Bing Crosby, who, of course, had been a Republican, hadn't supported Jack. In fact, this so infuriated Frank, he took a sledgehammer out and started to knock apart the helipad that he, at great expense, had installed just so Jack could land, Air Force One, the helicopter, right at his home.
Wow. If there is sounds like more of a connection with Robert Kennedy, after she was died or murdered, whatever we want to call it, and we'll find out more about that, why didn't JFK or Robert Kennedy do more of it to help investigate that, to find out if it was a murder, or did they have something to do with it?
Well, it was a hot potato. There are a lot of people who suspect or claim that Bobby and Jack had to do with it, that she was going to embarrass them. The story, I think, turns out to be more complex. Bobby and Jack actually were comparative innocents with regard to others in government. They really didn't believe in murder. I mean, they believed in open politics, unlike, for example, Lyndon Johnson, who conspired against Jack, forced himself on the ticket in Los Angeles in 1960. He wasn't on Bobby or Jack's long list, much less their short. But after Jack had already extended an invitation to Stuart Symington to be his running mate, Bobby went by the Johnson suite to extend a pro forma invitation and was astonished when the powerful majority leader of the Senate leaped on it. He threatened to expose that Jack had had dalliances with beautiful women, some of whom were spies for other countries, such as East Germany. Information he'd obtained from J. Edgar Hoover, that he suffered from Addison's disease and wasn't expected to live a long, healthy life. And moreover, if he weren't on the ticket, then any legislative proposals from the White House would be dead on arrival, because he, in the position of majority leader of the Senate, would bottle him up. Jack and Bobby tried to figure a way out, but were unable to do so and had to accept Lyndon as his running mate. When one of Lyndon's wealthy backers learned of this, he burst into the Johnson suite cursing and swearing that LBJ was going to help JFK become president. Bobby took him into a bedroom and explained what they had in mind. He came out all smiles and said he thought that was an excellent plan. In fact, Bobby would later declare in public that Jack wouldn't live out his term and that he'd die a violent death. Lyndon actually sent his chief administrative assistant, Cliff Carter, down to Dallas to make sure all the arrangements were in place for the assassination, after he'd managed to talk Jack into coming there to allegedly to mend fences between conflicting factions of the Democratic Party in Texas, but really so he could be taken out in Lyndon's backyard.
Wow.
Turns out among the new revelations we have coming from the latest release of documents about the assassination is that Earl Cabell, then the mayor of Dallas, who was the brother of Charles Cabell, Lieutenant General, who was deputy director of the CIA at the time of the Bay of Pigs, whom Jack had fired along with Richard Missel before he, with great ceremony, retired Allen Dulles, turns out to have become a member of the CIA in 1956.
Wow.
So whereas I pondered from like 1971 to 1981, what could be the connection between CIA and Dallas, it turned out to be surprisingly obvious when I figured out, of course, that the mayor was the brother of the deputy director.
Right.
I went actually into the archives of New College of the University of South Florida in Sarasota, where I was then teaching, and checked out the who's who for 1965. And it just sent shivers up my spine to read Charles Cabell, born in Dallas in 1903, Earl Cabell, born near Dallas in 1906. This was their backyard. The mayor, of course, was in control of the police department, motorcade, ceremonial activities. I mean, they knew Dealey Plaza was a perfect site for an ambush, where it appears that Edward Lansdale, who was a celebrated Air Force general who'd organized assassinations all over the world, positioned the shooters and determined the sequence of shots for taking out Jack on 22 November 1963.
Wow. Well, I mean, your knowledge. I love your knowledge. Yeah, I wish I had that knowledge. That's why we have you on, so I don't have to remember it all.
Well, Lyndon had a personal hitman by the name of Malcolm Mac Wallace, who murdered a dozen people for him, one of whom was a sister.
Malcolm Max Wallace?
Yeah, Malcolm Mac Wallace, one of whom was a sister who talked too much. And I'm just saying, the Kennedys, they talked about an Irish mafia. In fact, I had a conversation with Lyndon's mistress, Madeline Duncan Brown, in Dallas, where among the points we were conversing about had to do with her not understanding what John Connolly had meant when he was asked to describe Lyndon Johnson. He said, well, that would take every adjective in the dictionary. And she hadn't understood what he meant. And I pointed out it was because he had so many strengths, both for good and for evil, that for every positive attribute, he also had a negative one. So it would take all the words in the dictionary. But Madeline knew Malcolm Mac Wallace well. He was a phenomenal shot. He'd been out at the Skeeton Gun Club where she herself would practice her marksmanship, every day the 2 weeks before the assassination, and indeed appears to have been a gunman who was actually in the book depository, mistakenly firing at John Connolly in the belief that it was the liberal Texas senator who was his political nemesis. It actually obfuscated the politics, because no one would think that Lyndon would be involved in shooting John Connolly, who is a crony, had been involved in a lot of scams, including benefiting from work by Billy Saul Estes, who was so stunningly good at all this sort of thing that when he published a book about his life, he entitled it A Texas Legend in honor of himself. But Lyndon and Connolly, made a whole lot of money off of these scams. And in fact, one involved Billy Saul putting up what was supposed to be a massive cotton allotment for a huge loan from the Department of Agriculture, which sent out an inspector by the name of Henry Marshall. He was found shot repeatedly with a rifle. He had carbon monoxide in his lungs. He'd been rendered unconscious, but in the Texas of the day, that was declared a suicide.
Wow.
This was Mac Wallace's handiwork, one of many jobs he performed for Lyndon.
Well, you've put a great presentation together, and I'd like to show some of the slides that you've put together, because our audience, like us, we really want to know what happened to Marilyn and who killed Marilyn.
Just to add the rest of that story about
go
Marilyn.
for it.
See, when I was talking about, how Lyndon had, like Mac Wallace, of whom Madeline was well aware, she said, yeah, but, they had that Irish mafia. Well, when they were talking about the Irish mafia, these were, buddies, close personal friends of Jack Kennedy, who were just politically very skillful. They weren't hitmen. When you talked about Lyndon, and Mac, Lyndon had a personal hitman. Jack had political cronies who were simply very skilled, and they were called the Irish Mafia, but it wasn't because they were murdering anyone, only they were just politically very astute and very successful.
Doctor, what do you think about all these different, there's so many conspiracies, just like on the JFK thing. Some people think mafia, some people think Kennedy, some people think CIA. There's so many different ones. How do you sift through it all?
Well, and speaking about Jack, it's good you raised that question, Ron, because the fact is, the work I do as a conspiracy analyst or a conspiracy realist, and there's a wonderful article just been published in the Millennium Report, Conspiracy Realists, the arch enemies of the CIA, is to take, conspiracy theories from rumors, speculations, or guesses to conspiracy theories in the sense of empirically testable explanatory hypotheses. When you dig deep enough, you discover, for example, that the autopsy x-rays for JFK were altered at Bethesda Naval Hospital to conceal a massive blowout to the back of the head, that we have more than 15 indications of Secret Service complicity in setting him up for the hit, that the Zapruder film was massively edited to take out the limo stop. In fact, I have surmised that while we have 487 frames in the accident film, there should have been at least 1,000, that 100 were taken out turning from Houston onto Elm because William Greer swung out too widely, nearly hit a concrete abutment, then had to get back into line. That was so embarrassing, seemingly incompetent, they took it out. But also that after bullets began to be fired, William Greer pulled the limousine to the left and to a halt to make sure JFK would be killed. During this interval, he was hit twice in the head, once in the back of the head from the Dow taxi, slumped forward. Jack eased him back up, and then he was shot, hit the right temple by a frangible exploding bullet that blew his brains out the back of his already weakened cranium, where they impacted with Officer Bobby Hargis riding there so hard that he initially thought he himself had been hit. Now, it turns out that Larry Rivera has recovered the Fred Newman interviews with the 4 motorcycle escort officers and their supervisor, Stavis Ellis, and discovered what none of us had suspected, that after the limo was brought to a halt, Bobby Hargis parked his bike, ran in between the 2 limousines, which would have been impossible had they been in motion, up to the grassy knoll where he believed the shot had come from. Officer Douglas Jackson on the right actually rode his motorbike up onto the grassy knoll until it fell over, and then he continued to proceed on foot. 5 of the agents disembarked from the Secret Service Cadillac known as the Queen Mary and surrounded the presidential. One took a chunk of JFK's skull and brains from a little boy and threw it in the back seat. Now, I originally thought this limo stop was 6 or 8 seconds, relatively brief, but I'm unable to reconcile all of this activity with less than 20 seconds, which means since the camera was running at 18.3, according to the official account, we're talking about another 400 frames. So I now conclude they had to massively edit the film in order to get out the limo stop and all this other activity. It was such an obvious indication of multiple gunmen in order to give us this rarefied account. But when it comes to testing, you see, ask yourself, could the KGB, for example, have got a hold of the Zapruder film to edit it? The answer, of course, is no. Could Fidel Castro have extended his reach into Bethesda Naval Hospital to have x-rays altered? Of course, the answer is no. Could the mafia have arranged for the Secret Service to set him up for the hit? The answer, again, is no. So we're restricted to a very small, narrow class of cases that involve the Secret Service setting him up, the military and the Secret Service stealing the body to get it into military control where it was actually physically altered before the autopsy, and then altering the x-rays. I mean, this is a big op that was very much heavily dependent on the government, the CIA, and it means these hypotheses can actually be testable once you take them out of the rumor of mere speculation, rumor, or guesswork.
Wow. And
could you repeat that for a second?
you're right. Yeah. I didn't quite get that. Could you repeat it? But here's the thought. And Marilyn Monroe was a big part of this, and so she must have known a lot of information. There were many conspiracies around her death, but it seems like there was not a lot of evidence other than the pills. So I'm curious. Would this had to be a hit through the government, through the mob, or through, just a lover that
mafia, CIA?
Yeah. So what is your take?
If you want to turn to the slide set, Tony, I'll take you through it.
Yeah, please do.
And show how it can be some fairly subtle points that make all the difference. Here, of course, is classic for Marilyn, died on August 5th. At the age of 36 in L.A., born Norma Jean Mortensen, married to a fellow named James Doherty, who has disappeared into the recesses of history. Joe DiMaggio, very famous. Joe actually was profoundly in love with Marilyn. Mm-hmm. After they divorced, she would marry Arthur Miller, who was a celebrated American playwright, highly intellectual. Marilyn played a dumb blonde, but she was actually very smart. She was a very intelligent woman and, crafted her career with great skill in order to turn out at the top of the heap in an era that had many other beauties, of course, in competition. Ava Gardner, for example. as one illustration. My goodness, we had Elizabeth Taylor was another. But yet I think of, the first woman who comes to mind as a glamorous Hollywood star is Marilyn herself, even in competition with the likes of Ava Gardner and and Elizabeth Taylor. I mean, actually, when I was young, it's really astounding to me. When I was 11 years old, my mother and stepfather we went to a double feature, and it was a Place in the Sun with Elizabeth Taylor, a very tragic film. And I fell in love with Elizabeth Taylor in that movie. I mean, it's a very emotional kind of thing.
Right. Did you ever get to meet Elizabeth Taylor?
No, neither. I do love, by the way, Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf with Richard Burton. I think that was really Elizabeth's great love. Of course, they married and divorced and married again. But I think that film captures very much what their relationship was like. Richard had declared he was going to use Elizabeth to make himself a star, and he certainly managed to do that. But I think they had a very genuine, tempestuous love affair that was one of the greatest in the history of Hollywood.
I was very fortunate when I first moved to LA 14 years ago. About 6 months in, I got invited to a party, and I mean, it was huge. These were A-listers, and this limousine pulls up, and my friend said, "Hey, Tony, can you come and help me?" And I was like, "Sure, why not?" And lo and behold, they bring this wheelchair up, and Elizabeth Taylor gets out, sits in the wheelchair, and they said, "Do you mind pushing her to her table?" And I was like, I would be honored to do that.
Oh, that's just terrific, Tony. Yes. That's a great story.
Yeah.
By the way, thinking back upon it, this was when my wife and the man who would become my stepfather were still dating. So actually, I was younger than 11. I think I would have been on the order of maybe 6 or 7. I mean, a pretty young age to be going to, and it was a double feature. A Place in the Sun and A Streetcar Named Desire.
Wow. Two great movies. Wow. 2 of the all-time greats. Yeah, unbelievable stuff. All right, well, let's go to the next slide, because this is where it gets kind of, interesting with the JFK and Marilyn Monroe. All right, here we go.
Well, this is a nice description about Jack and Marilyn. The two spent time together in Bing Crosby's California vacation home. After their meeting, she is said to have called Jackie and told her about the affair, and that Jackie very casually says, "Well, then why don't you marry Jack so you can deal with all the hassles in the White House?" She was cool as a cucumber, Jackie. I'm a huge fan of Jackie Kennedy. She was an absolutely unbelievably wonderful first lady, and of course, they enchanted the whole world because they were such a spectacular couple.
Right. And with all the controversies around the Kennedys, I'm surprised that Jackie Onassis Bouvier did not have any controversies in herself. I mean, she was also another tortured soul, but I feel that it was very lucky to walk away and not have a controversy.
Well, he may know some.
Do you have any controversies about Jackie and even the Bouvier family?
Well, Black Jack, her father was also, like Jack's father, a notorious womanizer. I'm sure, he probably had more women than the rest of them put together.
Oh, wow.
But Jackie married Onassis, I'm convinced, because he was the richest man in the world, and she felt he could protect her and John and Caroline from the threats they would confront in the world. I don't think it was a marriage of love. In fact, they had a contract that even specified how many times per week Onassis could have sex with Jackie. And we have reports of her, for example, in one of the lifeboats, having sex in one of the lifeboats of Onassis' yacht. I mean, there's stunning stuff that's related here. Jackie was long-suffering. She handled it with great tranquility, and in the end, she arranged for her own death on her own terms in New York City.
Wow. I did not know that.
See? This is the kind of ask, man.
Right. All right, so here's the big question. How in the hell did policewoman Angie Dickinson have any connection to JFK, Marilyn Monroe?
Well, if you want to flip up the slide, yeah, this is terrific. How Angie reported she had an affair with Jack while he was in the White House, kept under wraps. She did actually confirm it in the following way. She observed that her affair with Jack Kennedy was the greatest 15 seconds of her life.
Oh, my God.
Which reflects the fact that while Jack had many women, he wasn't a great lover. And in fact, Marilyn is reported to observe that if you qualified male members in terms of small, medium, or large, that Jack was in the diminutive category.
Wow.
Just like you, Ron.
Hey, yeah. How about her even saying that publicly? You think she's going to get whacked? You know?
Right. That's hilarious.
Amazing.
Maybe that's why. She. Wow, that's pretty bold. So, well, it sounds like JFK. I mean, he was a womanizer, but it's almost like he did not even try to hide it because he was with very high-profile people.
Well, he didn't try to hide it, but in those days, the newspapers were very respectful of the privacy. I mean, there were notorious parties in the White House swimming pool. He had a couple of secretaries who were nicknamed Fiddle and Faddle, and they'd have sex romps in the White House pool. A number of members of the Secret Service, by the way, were quite offended by all this, and it appears to be one of the contributing factors to why they were willing to go along with setting him up for the hit, even though we're only talking about 4 or 5 key players, the most important of whom was Emory Roberts, who was in charge of the Secret Service Cadillac in Dallas, who left 2 agents behind at Love Field who ought to have been running beside the presidential limousine or riding on the back. They reorganized the vehicles, by the way, to put the president right out front. He should have been in the middle. To make him easier to identify. The car dealership that put up the vehicles made them different makes, models, and colors. Mm-hmm. So the perps would know where everyone was in the motorcade. Absolutely non-standard. Every other presidential motorcade is monotonously made up of black Cadillac limousines. There was never one like this. The 110th Military Intelligence Unit was ordered to stand down. It would have been in Dallas, distributed through the streets for crowd control. Instead, they allowed the crowd to spill out into the street. We have one photograph on Main Street where there's a bus. The presidential limo is right beside the bus. If you had an assassin with a handgun, he could have taken out Jack. Wow. And the crowd is spilling out around the bus. I mean, this is a manifest absurdity and indicates how casual and irresponsible was the Secret Service in allowing, setting him up for the hit. By the way, just to mention, for those who want more about Jack's assassination, I've done a recent 2-hour summary overview with all the latest research on the Brian Rue, R-U-H-E, the Brian Rue show entitled JFK, Who Was Responsible and Why, where I go through and give you photographic proof of every claim I'm making here and many more I make there. So you'll thoroughly understand the assassination, where there were at least 6, probably 7 assassins. I've been able to identify 6, the shots they took, the effects they had, and how they covered it up, where the most important work I've done has been to shatter the cover-up by bringing together the best people to ever study the assassination, including a world authority on the human brain, who was also an expert on wound ballistics, a PhD in physics, who was also an MD, board-certified in radiation oncology, which is a treatment of cancer using X-ray therapy. So he was an expert in the interpretation of X-rays, a physician who was in trauma room 1 when Jack's moribund body was brought in, and then 2 days later was responsible for the care and treatment of his alleged assassin. People of this order. So, those were a series of books I published in 1998, Assassination Science, Murder in Dealey Plaza 2000, The Great Zapruder Film Hoax 2003, where I've now published a 4th book about JFK with Moonrock Books entitled JFK, Who, How, and Why, where we have 14 contributors and bring the case up to date with the most current research, which includes some stunning confirmations of long suspected points, such as that Lee Oswald actually was standing in the doorway of the book depository at the time the motorcade passed by, which is the darkest secret the government has sought to keep from the American people of them all.
Listen, this is an enormous web that Marilyn got caught up in. She's almost like in the wrong place at the wrong time because look at this. Every time you bring up a name, he's got 12 woven conspiracies about it, that this was a cover-up, this guy whacked that guy. I mean, she was just like in a bad spot. You know, she may not have had...
Well, she did know too much. That is
right.
the principal reason she was taken out, as I'm going to explain to you.
Could it be the UFO thing, you think?
I'm sorry?
Do you think it had anything to do with UFOs, or do you think... Because Stephen Greer just came out and said that.
No, I discount that UFO stuff, although I don't regard myself as an expert. There was a point where I was going to delve into it. I had a stack of 12 books right here in my office. But something came up, and I don't know. I can't remember if it was a Boston bombing or Charleston shooting or San Bernardino. Something distracted me. But there are many others who know more about UFOs, but I don't believe it had anything to do with UFOs. So it had to do much more mundane, which I'm going to address directly as we proceed.
Stephen Greer's the one who posed that he thought she might be. That may have been the reason, but who knows?
Who had offered that suggestion?
Stephen Greer. Dr.
Stephen Greer. Yeah, yes, from the Disclosure Project.
Correct.
Yes.
No, I don't think it had anything to do with UFOs. No.
Well, I know a lot of presidents, they get in office and, they feel that very protected, like especially back then when it came to the press and their own people around them. They try to hide majority of the secret rendezvous and dealings. Even right now, dealing with Trump and the Russians. But one thing that one of his biggest controversies, and I'd love to have you discuss it, is John F. Kennedy's one of his biggest relationships that was very controversial with Ellen Romesh.
Yeah. If we look at the next slide, in fact, yes. This was a really quite important development. I mean, he had a lot of these affairs, but also one with beautiful women, some of whom were spies for East Germany. Notice here Ellen Romesh, who is a German-born hooker who shared the same looks, or very similar to Elizabeth Taylor, visited the White House on numerous occasions, attended scandalous pool parties. This would become significant because, for example, the shooter who fired the shot that entered Jack's right temple, who Frank Sturgis, who was a soldier of fortune, maybe the best shot in the world at the time, explained when he was arrested by NYPD, now Gold Shield detective Jim Rothstein, when he came to New York to murder Marita Lawrence to make sure she didn't testify for the House Select Committee, which was reinvestigating the case in 1976-77. She entered the apartment. His partner put a gun in Sturgis's stomach. He put a gun in his mouth. They took him into custody. He gave him the throwaway line, "Nice shooting." And Sturgis said, yeah, he admitted he'd been there, fired that shot. And he did it because Jack had betrayed the brigade at the Bay of Pigs. That was false, but the CIA allowed that impression to stand. And because he'd had dalliances with spies for East Germany. So this, what we're talking about, actually had consequences in relation to his own assassination.
Yeah, I couldn't even imagine how fearful Marilyn must have been. Like you said, wrong place, the wrong time, and getting that information, because I know in intimate moments people share things, but to realize after a while that the information that is your death warrant. That must have been to the point where she must have been.
Well, I don't think she was aware of that, and I'll explain the circumstances, that led to her death, because it was very particular and specific. So, and we'll get right into it.
Do you think she felt safe until her death?
Oh, I don't think she felt any special sense of dread. I don't think she was worried. She was emotionally distraught. She actually, I think at this point in time, was in love with Bobby, and he wasn't reciprocating. She wanted him to divorce Ethel. It wasn't so much that, Jack was going to divorce Jackie. I don't think that ever even crossed Marilyn's mind. But she had this much more powerful emotional involvement with Bobby. And she really, I think, did want Bobby to divorce to marry Marilyn, which, of course, was simply not going to happen. It wasn't in the cards.
Right. So what about the book, The Murder of Marilyn Monroe, Case Closed by J. Margolis? I've not read the book itself. What information is in that book that we might be able to pull from?
Yeah, if you want to pull up the cover, absolutely. Well, this is in the genre that might be described as Kennedy character assassination books. I mean, I'll give you the bottom line here and a couple of quotes from the back cover. Dr. Thomas Noguchi, the pathologist of the stores who performed the autopsy and ruled Marilyn's death a probable suicide, reportedly didn't find any needle marks on her body. However, testimonies in the murder of Marilyn case closed fly in the face of Noguchi's statement. I'll comment on that. Mysteriously, all of Marilyn's autopsy tissue samples vanished from the coroner's office. She was not only killed, but slandered in death by making it appear she had committed suicide. Here's a third. Bobby did not act alone. He had co-conspirators in her murder, his brother-in-law, actor Peter Lawford, and Maryland psychiatrist, Dr. Ralph Greenson. Now, this book maintains that Bobby was so upset with Marilyn, and he was in the vicinity that day. He did visit her that day.
Oh, he did?
They were in a state of antagonism at the time. This book maintains that Bobby used Greenson, Maryland's psychiatrist, to actually kill her by injecting barbiturates directly into her heart.
Ooh.
And what's significant about this, as I'm going to explain, is that Noguchi found no needle marks, no puncture marks in her heart. It was a different cause of death. Now, you got this one quote claiming that Noguchi was covering it up. That's from Emirates Woman magazine. This other from the Daily Express, this from the Daily Mail, which are two UK newspapers. But the fact is, Thomas Noguchi was a world-famous medical examiner. He was a man of absolute integrity. After Bobby's death, for example, he discovered that Bobby had died from shots fired from behind. One had actually passed through his suit and it hadn't hit him at all, but he had 3 shots that hit his body. 2 were under the armpit, but the key was a shot right behind his right ear, fired from a distance of 1.5 inches. Now, this was at such stunning contradiction with the official LAPD report that Sirhan, who had been in front of Bobby and who emptied 8 shots from his revolver, had been the responsible party, that the police carried enough weight in LA at the time to have Noguchi fired. Now, this is an inversion of the way in which evidence ought to be weighed, because Noguchi, you begin with the autopsy report. Noguchi was absolutely respected worldwide. He was giving us a straight scoop. It was the LAPD who did in collusion with the CIA in taking out Bobby that wanted to make sure the world didn't come to a differing conclusion. I published about it an article entitled RFK Outing the CIA at the Ambassador, which you can find online, in which I go into this, where 3 different figures who were filmed at the Ambassador, who were officials of the agency. Gordon Campbell was one. George Joannides was another. He was a particularly key player because he was in charge of PSYOPs both at the time of Jack and Bobby's death. And the other was Sanchez Morales, David Sanchez Morales, who was a very famous assassin for the agency, that they were there on that evening, and they were identified by multiple witnesses, provides powerful proof that the CIA was deeply involved in taking out Bobby and in collusion with the LAPD, I assert on the basis of my research. So the LA cops wanted to get their guy, just as the Dallas cops had got Jack.
Now, let's talk about Marilyn's diary, because back in the day, that most women kept diaries. Was there a diary, and did it give any evidence, or was it tampered with? Do you know of?
Well, there appears to have been a diary, but I don't know that was discovered. It's a very interesting case because there's a parallel in the case of JFK, where he had this wonderful relationship with a woman whose son used to sit on, her name was Mary Meyer. Her husband, Cord, was in charge of covert ops for the CIA at the time of the assassination, according to E. Howard Hunt in his deathbed confession to his son, St. John. The chain of command went from Lyndon Johnson to Cord Meyer. to David Atlee Phillips, who was in charge of Western Hemisphere for CIA, to William Harvey in charge of assassinations, to David Sanchez Morales, and then down to the underlings, who, by the way, included George Herbert Walker Bush, who appears to have supervised a hit team in the Dow Tex, from which 3 shots were fired with an unsilenced mine liquor Carcano, the only weapon that was left unsilenced in order to create the acoustical impression of 3 shots only having been fired. The acoustics in Dealey Plaza were such that when the other shots were fired from multiple different directions, because they were silenced, very difficult to sort things out. The one shot that hit Jack in the throat was fired from inside the triple underpass, passed through the windshield, and it turns out when a bullet high velocity passes through a windshield like this, it makes the sound of a firecracker. So there are many witnesses there. There were several hundred who said the first shot sounded different, that it had the sound of a firecracker. But that was actually not only not the first shot, it was the second hit on Jack. He'd already been hit in the back by a shot fired from the top of the county records building by a Dallas deputy sheriff by the name of Harry Weatherford, using a .30-06 to implant a Mannlicher Carcano bullet of smaller caliber using a plastic collar known as a sabot. A shooter in the triple underpass, by the way, appears to have been Jack Lawrence, who was an Air Force expert who'd gone to work at the car dealership just a few days before the motorcade, and then showed up back there all muddy, nauseating, vomiting. He made his escape, it appears, through a sewer system under the Dealey Plaza, which was fairly extensive. And, there was one more of the shooters. So,
James, I'm gonna ask this because there was actually a comment in our chat room. Liz, she said her husband did 5 movies, worked on 5 movies with Marilyn. Said she was a lovely, wonderful person. This was and you can see it in our chat room. But he said he did feel like that she was controlled by a lot of people. So, that being said, with all the affairs with the Kennedys and other maybe mobs and everything else, who in Hollywood do you feel that could have been involved and at least knew what really happened to Marilyn? Could it, like Frank Sinatra? Because this guy.
No, Tony, I'm going to give you the breakdown of what happened as I've been able to put it together. I've done so much research in this area that you can read through different works and sort out the difference between the plausible and the implausible. I'm going to give you my best take on how this was done and exactly who did it and why. So I'm not going to leave you in any doubt. There were a lot of people who wanted to manipulate Marilyn for one reason or another, even including heads of studios, of course.
Right.
Her personal physician, this green son, who, according to this book, actually killed her with an injection into the heart. I think we can discount that because of Noguchi's finding nothing wrong with the heart. Noguchi, as I'm saying, is a man of immense integrity. And they're attempting to get around the fact that the medical evidence refutes their hypothesis by impeaching his integrity. Well, that doesn't cut it in my book.
Well, because you sent some pictures over, and of course this looks like the Kennedys. So I'm curious.
Well, this is after she sang "Happy Birthday." This is very famous.
Oh yeah, that
they
dress.
said how she had to be sewn into that dress, which was skin tight.
Right.
It's one of the most remarkable items of memorabilia in the history of Hollywood. But here, having a conversation with Jack and with Bobby, and as I've already mentioned, she had these dalliances with Jack, but I don't think they had any emotional significance. Her relationship with Bobby appears to have been of a different order altogether.
Well, unfortunately, we have about 6 minutes left. So
I want to. You better move, Tony.
I know,
Tony, because I want to give you the straight skinny.
Yeah, we want the answer.
Jack.
You're not leaving us
Jack.
hanging on this one.
Yeah, no hanging.
This is simply Jack with Sinatra, and is not crucial to the understanding the sequence of events. If you keep moving, now another with Sinatra, just a great shot of Marilyn.
That is a great shot. That is a great shot.
They were like the king and queen of Hollywood, you could say at the time.
And
if you go to the next, now we're getting serious. This is Sam Giancana, who is of course a head of the mafia in Chicago, powerful crime boss along with Santo Traficante and Carlos Marcello Jr. This guy was a heavy hitter. And if you go to the next slide, you'll find that he and Jack shared a woman in common, Judith Exner. who has both had relations with Sam Giancana, also with Jack Kennedy. She was used as a conduit to transfer information between Jack to Sam and back to Jack by way of Judith. So this is one very important connection. And in fact, Sam appears to have had anxiety that Marilyn was going to hold a press conference, which he threatened to do. She was going to say she was going to let it all come out. Well, that would have been unsettling to Jack and Bobby because she would have talked about their relationship. But Sam was worried that she might also talk about the mob. So if you go forward here, Tony, I'll try to tie it together.
Yeah.
These are some of the participants. These are from Op 40, people involved in the assassination. I got to know Chauncey Holt personally. He was the third of the three tramps. Charles Harrelson was the tallest of the three. Charles Rogers was the first of the three tramps. Antonio Veciana wound up in a photograph on the cover of my first book, Assassination Science, where unbeknownst to me, we had Rafael Cruz, Ted Cruz's father, captured in the famous photograph. Standing behind him is Antonio Veciana, the founder of Alpha 66, one of the most vicious. Then you got David Ferry, of course, mafia pilot who was involved. William Greer, the driver, the second from the right on the bottom. Jim Hicks was in Dallas with an antenna sticking out his pocket. Robert May, who, of course, worked for Howard Hughes and appears to have known a lot about the assassination too. But if you go forward, we'll see that the key player turns out to be Johnny Rosselli, who was a very famous guy, sometimes called Handsome Johnny. He had actually been one of the gunmen in the St. Valentine's Day Massacre.
Oh, wow.
He was a colonel in the CIA. Bradley Ayers, who was an Army captain assigned to the CIA and stationed at JM Wave in Miami, from which they were running anti-Castro operations. In his book, The Zenith Secret, reported having met Rosselli. He also met those guys at the Ambassador, by the way, Gordon Campbell and George Joanitas. Sam was so concerned that Marilyn might spill the beans that he gave Johnny the responsibility for taking her out, but he insisted it must be done absolutely in a painless fashion. So if you go forward, I'll explain what we know about actually how it was done. They talk about this bottle of pills there, but that's really incidental. The key description about how the murder was carried out, in accordance with Sam Giancana's instructions, was they chloroformed Marilyn. And then they inserted a rectal suppository of barbiturates, which shows up in terms of some of its effects in Thomas Noguchi's autopsy report, because it talks about discoloration of the colon. I mean, this is from the effect of the barbiturates entering by that access route and then spreading throughout her body, bringing about her death in an utterly painless fashion.
Hey, Jim, also, wasn't there no pills found in her stomach, right?
In the that's actually correct also, Ron. And I think we have one or two more slides for me to add to it. Yeah, this is the house outside. And Tony, you told me you actually had the opportunity of visiting this home, her Brentwood Hacienda.
Once in a lifetime, like a second family to me here in L.A. They renovated their house. Their friends owned the Maryland house, and so they allowed them to rent out the house while they renovated their own house. And I had the opportunity to go over there, which is rare to even – it opens up to anyone. So it was to be in the house. I have to say you feel like a presence of Marilyn, but it's very strange to be in the house where she was murdered.
Yeah. Well, if you flip to what I think is the last slide, here you actually were, pill bottle near Marilyn Monroe found dead, reported to be a suicide. Well, that's a nice theory, but it doesn't hold up. And in fact, the book I recommend on this very subject is, in my opinion, completely brilliant, completely authentic, as shown in the final slide. It's by Darwin Porter, entitled Marilyn at Rainbow's End: Sex, Lies, Murder, and the Great Cover-Up. This, in my opinion, is a work without peer. When it goes into her relationship with other figures in Hollywood at the time, you feel as though you're right there on the scene, witnessing it yourself. This is a fabulous book. And I regard it as by far the most authentic in terms of its report of how her death came about, but not at the hands of Bobby or Jack, however much they would have preferred that Marilyn not talk about any of these things and spill the beans. but because Sam Giancana was concerned that she should talk about the mafia and reveal things he didn't want the public to know.
All right, recap real quick. Who did it?
Sam Giancana directed Johnny Rosselli, who is his most trusted henchman, to take out Marilyn in a painless fashion. She was chloroformed and then administered a rectal suppository, a massive barbiturates that brought about her death. The pill bottle was incidental. There are claims that her physician killed her with a needle in the book we talked about to begin with, but that is inconsistent with the evidence,
Right.
whereas the report I'm giving you here is consistent with the evidence. Thomas Noguchi was a righteous man, and he actually gave us the clues. They're very subtle, but they're very telling.
Once again, you knocked it out of the park. We so appreciate you for taking the time on a Wednesday to do this special about Marilyn Monroe. We get the facts here, and we hope, truth be told, you guys listen to our YouTube channel. Find us on iHeartRadio, iTunes, Stitcher, all the places, Google Play. You can find Mr. Professor James Fetzer at moonrocksbooks.com. And I know he's going to be back very soon because he's one of our favorite guests. So thank you, sir, for always being available for us and always bringing it. So
Well, thanks, Tony and Ron. I think you're doing a great job with the show. It's always a pleasure for me to join you.
All right. Well, thank you guys for tuning in for another Truth Be Told episode. We appreciate it. And like I said, I'm Tony Sweet.
Captain Ron.
Until next time, see you then.